The fastest way to destroy your bank account is to buy a business that makes you feel sophisticated before it makes you any money. That is the first thing I would tell you if you sat across from me and said, you want to buy a company. Most people think risk lives in the ugly spreadsheet, the old trucks, the dirty warehouse, the business nobody brags about at dinner. I have found the opposite. The real danger usually hides inside the business that looks clean, modern, validated, and easy to explain to your friends. That kind of business flatters your ego before it pays your bills. And once a business starts flattering your ego, your judgment gets expensive. I have spent my life looking at incentives, cash flow, protection, permanence, and the difference between reported success and durable success. So when I look at a business, I do not start with revenue. I do not start with vibes. I do not start with what social media says is passive. I run it through a filter. I call it the owner filter. A business either passes the owner filter or it fails and takes the owner down with it. Most of the businesses ordinary people chase today fail that filter in the first 5 minutes. They fail because they depend on fashion, borrowed traffic, fragile relationships, hidden maintenance, fake recurring revenue, or systems you do not actually own. They look like shortcuts. They operate like traps. And that is why so many people who want to become owners never escape the psychology of employees. They are still responding to status. They are still buying what sounds exciting instead of what stays paid. They are still choosing applause over protection. If you want to own businesses the way I think about ownership, you need to stop asking a childish question. You need to stop asking, does this business look easy to buy? You need to ask the adult question. What keeps the cash coming after the excitement leaves? That is the owner filter. And once you see the world through that filter, whole categories of businesses immediately turn red. E-commerce is one of them. E-commerce seduces people because it appears to solve the hardest part of business before you arrive. There is already a store, there are already customers, there is already some revenue, the seller tells you the market has been validated, the site looks polished, the dashboard blinks, orders have already happened. You think you are buying proof a lot of the time. You are buying residue. You are buying the remains of a wave that has already broken. I have seen people get hypnotized by that mistake because the revenue history looks real. During a demand spike, almost anything can look like genius. During the air purifier, boom, for example. Businesses that seemed brilliant for a season started looking very different once demand cooled off. Then the owners who had enjoyed the wave started looking for exits, and buyers who arrived late convinced themselves. They were purchasing momentum. They were not buying momentum. They were buying gravity. They were buying inventory risk, supplier risk, manufacturing risk, foreign dependency, AD platform dependency, algorithm rent, and a business model with almost no real protection. When your so-called moat is a Facebook ad account, you do not own a moat. You rent attention from somebody else. That is not ownership. That is dependency dressed up as entrepreneurship. The owner filter kills businesses like that because the cash is too exposed. One algorithm shift, one increase in customer acquisition cost, one supplier delay, one quality issue, one shipping shock, and the whole thing starts coughing blood. You need to understand something very clearly. A business that depends on constant external permission is not free. It is not durable. It is not yours in the way that matters. It is a rented machine sitting on someone else's floor. The same trap shows up in agencies. And I would be even blunter there. People love agencies because they can be started with a laptop, a pitch deck, and enough confidence to lie to themselves for 6 months. They see case studies, recurring clients, nice margins on paper, and they imagine they are buying a scalable operating system. A lot of the time, they are buying a stressed owner with a good calendar. That is not the same thing. Many agencies are just labor packaged as strategy. The revenue looks recurring until you notice that 1 or 2 major clients carry the whole organism on their back. Then you ask the only question that matters, what happens if one of those clients leaves? Now you are no longer looking at monthly revenue, you are staring at concentrated fragility. If the business can be rebuilt by another hungry operator with LinkedIn, a phone, and 6 months of effort, then the supposed moat is mostly narrative. And narrative does not defend cash flow. The knowledge walks out the door, the relationships walk out the door, the service quality walks out the door, the previous owner leaves, and suddenly the buyer discovers he did not purchase an asset. He purchased dependence on momentum he did not create. That fails the owner filter. What you want is protection, not excitement. Protection, not a pitch. Protection, not I can see how this could grow. Protection, I would rather own a business that embarrasses your cocktail party instincts and quietly survives than one that earns admiration for 90 days and then teaches you what churn feels like. Franchises are where people get even more confused because the brand name numbs their skepticism. A franchise can be a brilliant structure or a beautiful way to become a well-dressed tenant. Those are not the same thing. I have seen people throw money into a franchise fee because the package feels safe. They think systems are in place. They think the playbook is proven. They think the risk has been reduced because somebody else has already done the hard thinking. Sometimes that is true. Often it is true only for the franchisor. That distinction can cost you years. If the franchisor takes the best economics, controls the terms, controls the transferability, controls the territory, and keeps clipping your upside while leaving you with local competition and operating headaches, you do not own a business. You own an obligation with branding. I have watched people learn that lesson the painful way, pay the fee, work the hours, carry the local risk, fight the local operators, then discover that the system you thought you bought never really belonged to you. That is not leverage. That is tribute. Now, I am not foolish enough to say every franchise is bad. That would be lazy thinking, and lazy thinking is expensive. A franchise with real territory, real brand power, and an operator who has actually gone through the system from the inside can become something very different. If a man spends years inside a winning franchise, learns the economics cold, studies the site selection, understands the customer base, knows the margins, knows the financing, knows exactly what makes the unit succeed or fail, then he is no longer buying a logo. He is buying with competence. That changes the filter result. This is one of the most important things I can tell you. A mediocre business in the hands of an informed operator can beat a beautiful business in the hands of a delusional one. The owner filter does not only judge the business, it judges the distance between your skill and the business S demands. When that distance is too wide, the business becomes a machine for humiliating your optimism. Landscaping is another category where reality hides behind familiarity. People see trucks, recurring customers, weekly service, simple operations. They think, this is steady, this is local, this is understandable. They get comfortable too early. Comfort is one of the most expensive emotions in capital allocation. A local service business is not attractive because it is local. It is attractive only if the customer relationship is sticky, the economics are protected, and the seller cannot casually recreate what you just bought. That last part matters more than most buyers want to admit. Non-competes sound powerful to inexperienced people because they exist on paper. Paper has a way of making people feel safe, but paper does not mow lawns, answer service calls, retain crews, or stop a determined former owner from quietly re-entering the market in a way that is expensive for you to fight. I have seen buyers discover that legal language and economic reality are not the same thing. That lesson can cost millions. When a customer can switch with almost no pain, when a seller's local relationships remain personal, when the operating know-how lives in habits instead of systems, and when the market is crowded with low-cost alternatives, the owner filter starts flashing red, and there is another brutal truth ordinary buyers refuse to face. If the business is truly exceptional, dense, protected, and scalable, there is a decent chance sophisticated money has already found it. Private equity is not perfect, but it is not asleep either. That creates a harsh paradox for the small buyer. If the business is cheap enough for you to casually afford, there is often a reason. If it is good enough to justify paying up, someone stronger may already be bidding. So you have to stop fantasizing about easy steals in obvious categories. The world is more competitive than your hope wants it to be. Laundromats are a classic case of social media poisoning judgment. I have nothing against a laundromat. I have something against people who think a laundromat is a money printer because an influencer posted a thread with clean photos and a fantasy cap rate. This is what happens when a business gets sold to the imagination instead of the intellect. People hear passive income and stop asking maintenance questions. They hear coin machines and stop asking repair questions. They hear cash flow and stop asking reinvestment questions. That is how people walk into a handyman business wearing the costume of an investor. A machine that keeps breaking is not passive. A business whose real economics depend on the owner being unusually handy, unusually attentive, or unusually underpaid is not a durable cash machine. You have to make a distinction most people avoid because it ruins the fantasy revenue. After ignoring maintenance is not cash flow. Cash flow begins after reality has been paid, after the repairs, after the replacements, after the hidden labor, after the equipment fatigue, after the nonsense. Anything before that is emotional support accounting, and emotional support accounting has probably destroyed more small business buyers than inflation. Now, the reason I am so hard on these glamour categories is not because I want you to become cynical. It is because I want you to earn the right kind of optimism. There is a better pattern. Once you stop looking for businesses that impress amateurs, you start seeing businesses that quietly pass the owner filter. And the first thing you notice is that the best small businesses are often boring in exactly the way the crowd hates. That boredom is not a weakness. It is a defense system. Pallet recycling is a perfect example. Nobody dreams about pallets when they are 18 years old. That is precisely why the economics can be attractive. You are dealing with a service layer most consumers never think about. Serving real businesses inside local and fragmented markets with customer relationships that are annoying to build and therefore not instantly replicated by every ambitious teenager with a laptop that matters. Whenever a business is too boring for the crowd and too operational for the tourist, my ears start working. Not because every such business is great. Plenty are messy, plenty are hard, plenty require operational discipline most people do not have. But boring B2B often comes with a kind of protection consumer businesses lack. The customer is not buying because your ad made him feel something. He is buying because he needs the service to keep moving. That simple fact changes the quality of revenue. You also begin to notice another pattern. A lot of attractive businesses sit close to urgency, compliance, or interruption. Commercial refrigeration is attractive for that reason. When a cooler dies inside a restaurant or a store, nobody forms a committee to admire your branding. They need the problem solved immediately because delay becomes spoilage, lost sales, and chaos. In that moment, your service is not a luxury. It is a rescue line. Urgency creates pricing power. And pricing power is one of the purest signals of businesses passing the owner filter. But do not get lazy. The presence of urgency does not automatically create a great business. You still need systems, you still need technicians, you still need service quality, you still need customer relationships that last, you still need enough operational intelligence to deliver under pressure. This is where amateurs make another fatal mistake. They hear one good trait and stop filtering. I never stop filtering. A good business is not built from one attractive sentence. It is built from a pattern. That pattern looks something like this. Established customer relationships, recurring or repeat need. Low customer desire to switch. Limited physical obsolescence, manageable reinvestment. A service that matters when it is needed. An owner who can professionalize what exists. A market too unglamorous for heavy competition, but large enough to matter. When you find multiple traits like that in one place, now you are not daydreaming anymore. Now you are getting close to an asset, and once you understand that pattern, the real money starts appearing in places the average person never bothers to study. Bookkeeping and accounting practices are one of those places. A lot of people make the mistake of seeing bookkeeping as small, dull, and trapped in the past. I see an established book of business, recurring need, trust, compliance, and a service customers cannot casually skip. Then I ask the next question, can this become more efficient without destroying the customer relationship? Now we are talking, This is where the world is changing for years. Many professional service businesses were harder to scale than people wanted to admit because too much of the output lived inside expensive human time. That made them good little businesses and difficult larger businesses. What changes the game is not a buzzword, it is systematization. If you can buy a practice with real customer relationships and then use technology to standardize workflows, improve consistency, reduce labor intensity per client, and speed up integration when you buy the next practice, you are not just buying revenue, you are building a consolidation engine. That is a very different game. Notice what makes it attractive. There is labor. Yes, but there is not a warehouse full of inventory rotting in the dark. There are no machines dying in the corner. There is no expensive equipment begging to be replaced every time you start feeling prosperous. The cash profile can be dramatically cleaner if the service is structured correctly. This is what people miss when they chase trendy businesses. They stare at growth and ignore friction. I stare at friction because friction decides who keeps the cash. A labor-only or labor-dominant professional service business with recurring client relationships, compliance need, and the ability to improve delivery through systems can become far more valuable than the average person realizes. Commercial insurance agencies live in a similar universe. Again, the average person misses the magic because the work is not glamorous. But an established book of business is not easy to build. Cold starting trust in insurance is painful. Renewal behavior matters. Embedded relationships matter. The number of years a client stays matters. Once you step into an agency where businesses have been renewing again and again, what you are seeing is not just revenue, you are seeing time. And time is one of the greatest assets you can buy. The crowd always wants shortcuts. I want to buy time somebody else spent building. That is what a real book of business represents. Years of repetition, trust, process, and embedded habit. You cannot tweet your way into that. You cannot manifest it. You either build it slowly or buy it carefully. That is why the owner filter loves established local businesses with enduring customer relationships. They compress time. They allow you to purchase history instead of begging for it. Now, let me tell you where some of the highest quality small business opportunities often live. Dirty work. Work nobody posts about. Work people pretend is beneath them right up until they need it desperately. Grease traps, septic services, water treatment, backflow inspection, fire compliance work. I want you to notice the pattern because it is the whole game. These are not businesses built on taste. They are built on necessity. They are not dependent on trends. They are tied to rules, emergencies, infrastructure, and recurring pain. That is exactly where I like to look. If every restaurant is legally required to deal with a problem, there is demand. If every building has to satisfy a compliance requirement, there is demand. If failing to maintain a system can create legal, financial, or operational damage, there is demand. And the beauty is that a lot of these categories remain too small, too local, too messy, or too unsexy for giant competition to attack with full force. That does not make them easy. It makes them available. There is a huge difference. The amateur wants easy, the owner wants available. One fantasy gets you trapped, the other gets you paid. I learned something about compliance in a way I would not wish on anybody. When you lose something valuable because you were not as compliant as you thought you were, you stop viewing compliance as paperwork. You start viewing it as economic reality. A requirement that seems invisible during good times can suddenly become the line between getting made whole and absorbing a brutal loss yourself. That lesson changes how you look at certain businesses. A service people barely notice on the budget can still be mission critical. In fact, that is often where the opportunity is strongest. If customers must keep paying for something, but it does not get debated every week because the cost is small relative to the downside of neglect, you may be looking at a beautiful corner of the world. Backflow and fire inspection work fit that pattern. The revenue is recurring because the need is recurring. The service is sticky because the requirement is sticky. The customer is not shopping for excitement. The customer is trying to stay safe, stay compliant, stay open, and avoid damage. That is a much healthier source of demand than pure desire. Desire is unstable. Necessity is steady. There is another reason I like these businesses. Many of them are built by solid owner-operators who understand the work deeply enough to create a real local company, but have never fully professionalized it. That creates an opening for a buyer who can bring systems, process discipline, hiring structure, and better capital allocation. That is where you stop being a dreamer and start becoming an owner. Buying a small business is not about finding perfection. It is about finding a base of reality strong enough to improve. And if you are young, undercapitalized, or not yet fully skilled, there is still a path most people ignore because their ego gets in the way of apprenticeship. I would rather see you humble yourself for a year inside a good business than swagger into a bad one with borrowed conviction. There is tremendous power in going to an owner and saying, I will learn the operation, earn trust, structure the buyout intelligently, and take over from a position of competence instead of fantasy. That approach is not glamorous. That is exactly why it works. The crowd wants immediate control. The intelligent buyer wants reduced error. The crowd wants a shortcut to identity. The intelligent buyer wants a path to durable economics. You do not need to start as the hero. You need to start as the least delusional person in the room. There is a psychological shift that separates people who stay trapped in jobs from people who build ownership. Employees often optimize for what feels respectable. Owners optimize for what survives scrutiny. Employees want linear effort with clear praise. Owners learn to love asymmetry, delayed rewards, operational truth, and businesses that look plain on the outside because the economics are attractive underneath. That shift is not just financial, it is moral. Because once you understand what a good business actually is, you stop lying to yourself. You stop calling fragility a brand. You stop calling capex neglect cash flow. You stop calling platform dependence a moat. You stop calling temporary demand permanent demand. You stop calling vanity recurring revenue. And that honesty is worth millions. I am not telling you every boring business is a gold mine. That would be childish. Plenty of boring businesses are terrible. Plenty of dirty businesses are underpriced for a reason. Plenty of local operators are one illness away from collapse because they never built systems. Plenty of service businesses have hidden labor issues, sloppy books, or customer concentration that can bury you. That is why the filter matters. I do not want you to become romantic about boring businesses. I want you to become precise. Boring is not the answer. Protected is the answer. Sticky is the answer. Necessary is the answer. Recurring is the answer. Low reinvestment relative to cash generation is the answer. Compliance-tied demand is often the answer. Urgency-tied demand can be the answer. An established book of business is often the answer. A path to professionalization is often the answer. You need to keep filtering until you can explain exactly why the cash should keep coming, exactly what can break it, exactly how much of the system you truly control, and exactly how your competence closes the gap between today, business, and tomorrow, better one. Anything less is not investing. It is self-hypnosis with paperwork. There is another uncomfortable truth I want to press into you. Most people do not actually want to own a great business. They want to feel like the kind of person who owns one. Those are very different desires. The first desire leads you toward uncomfortable facts, dirty industries, long apprenticeships, awkward negotiations, boring recurring revenue, compliance calendars, service routes, customer retention data, technician quality, and unsexy process. The second desire leads you toward logos, surface metrics, social media threads, categories everybody is talking about, and businesses that can be described in one sentence to impress strangers. One path builds wealth. The other path buys costumes. I do not care how intelligent you are. If your ego is driving the purchase, the owner filter will expose you sooner or later. That is why the best opportunities often feel emotionally wrong before they feel economically right. You do not want to tell people you bought a grease trap service. You do not want to explain that your path to wealth came through backflow inspection, bookkeeping consolidation, pallet recovery, or refrigeration maintenance. Good. That reluctance is usually a sign you are getting closer to reality. Reality does not need your admiration. It needs your discipline. And discipline in small business acquisition begins with one principle: never confuse visibility with value. Some of the worst businesses are hyper-visible because everybody understands the story. Some of the best are nearly invisible because normal people never bothered to understand the mechanism. Mechanism is where the money is. When a service solves a recurring problem inside a local market with real switching friction, reasonable operating complexity, and a customer relationship that would take years to rebuild from zero, you are not looking at a side hustle anymore. You are looking at a compounding base. Now, I want to go one layer deeper because this is where real owners separate themselves. Once you identify a business that passes the owner filter, your job is not done. Your job begins. Then you ask the harder questions. Can I improve route density? Can I improve response time? Can I structure incentives better? Can I retain the key people? Can I upgrade billing discipline? Can I reduce customer concentration? Can I turn tribal knowledge into process? Can I make the service consistent enough to replicate without destroying the local trust that made it work? That is capital allocation at the operating level. And that is how small businesses become empires, not through fantasies, through boring refinements stacked for long enough. That is another reason I am drawn to businesses with emergency need or compliance need. The demand is easier to understand. You are not trying to manufacture desire out of thin air. You are meeting a condition that already exists that makes your operating energy more productive because you are solving, not seducing. The consumer internet has trained too many people to think all value starts with attention. It does not. A great deal of value starts with obligation. A building must be inspected. A restaurant cooler must be repaired. A grease trap must be cleaned. Books must be kept. Policies must be renewed. Pallets must move. These are not glamorous sentences. They are very profitable sentences when linked to the right structure. I want you to pay attention to the phrase, book of business. That phrase should light up your brain. A real book of business is accumulated trust. It is proof that customers came back, proof that service was delivered, proof that someone spent years laying small bricks. You can now evaluate, preserve, and improve. That is incredibly valuable. I would rather buy proven repetition than chase viral possibility. Viral possibility flatters the imagination. Proven repetition feeds the owner. And if you can pair proven repetition with smarter systems, technology that genuinely improves delivery and operational rigor, you are not just buying the past, you are extending its earning life. That is what intelligent acquisition looks like. You are not searching for a business you can brag about. You are searching for a structure that keeps producing after the seller leaves, after the excitement fades, after the first surprise expense hits, after the market gets noisier, after customers become harder to impress. The average person has never been taught to think this way. They have been taught to think like buyers of products, not buyers of cash streams. So they overvalue aesthetics and undervalue stickiness. They overvalue novelty and undervalue necessity. They overvalue surface margin and undervalue maintenance. They overvalue sales and undervalue protection. They overvalue control theater and undervalue actual ownership if you want to stop living in that confusion. You need to make a clean break. You need to stop looking for what is exciting to buy. Start looking for what is painful to replace. That is one of the cleanest filters I know. If the customer would suffer materially by losing you, now you have leverage. If the customer can replace you over lunch, you are standing on thin ice no matter how nice the website looks. This is why I keep coming back to the same kind of businesses. Not because they are fashionable, because they respect reality. Reality says businesses with low switching costs are fragile. Reality says heavy reinvestment chews up apparent cash flow. Reality says trend demand reverses. Reality says client concentration kills. Reality says operational knowledge matters. Reality says compliance creates durable demand. Reality says urgency creates pricing power. Reality says local relationship books can be worth far more than outsiders realize. Reality says systems multiply value. Reality says ego is expensive. And if you ignore reality long enough, reality sends the invoice, That invoice can look like buying an online brand right after the demand spike ends. It can look like paying a franchise fee to become somebody else's labor. It can look like believing a non-compete is a force field when it is really a paragraph. It can look like buying passive income and discovering maintenance. It can look like mistaking a good salesman's deck for a durable economic machine. It can also look like overlooking $1 million opportunity because it was wrapped in grease, paperwork, route density, inspection calendars, and customers who never planned to brag about you on the internet. You need to decide which pain you prefer. The pain of being bored long enough to see the truth, or the pain of being flattered long enough to get trapped. Those are the real options, not risk or no risk, truth pain or illusion pain. If I were starting over with modest capital and no interest in entertaining strangers, I would not waste time competing for obvious, sexy businesses that everyone on the internet already wants. I would hunt for local, recurring, necessary, underloved service businesses with a real customer base, a path to better systems, and demand anchored in urgency or compliance. I would look for the operator who built something useful but not scalable. I would look for the customers whose habits already exist. I would look for the work the market needs, not the work the market applauds. And then I would ask the hardest question of all, can I become the kind of person who deserves to own this? That question matters because buying a business will not save a foolish operator. A good business can cushion stupidity for a while, but it cannot cancel it forever. You need the humility to learn, the discipline to inspect numbers without self-deception, the patience to build systems, the toughness to manage people fairly, and the restraint to keep your ego from turning a practical asset into a vanity project. Ownership is not a title. Ownership is a burden carried intelligently. The people who understand that often end up much wealthier than the people who only wanted the title. So here is my warning to you. Do not let the internet train your instincts. Do not let your friends vote on your capital allocation. Do not let excitement overrule structure. Do not buy a business because it sounds smart in one sentence. Do not confuse a seller's story with an owner's economics. Run the filter. Ask where the cash actually comes from. Ask what keeps the customer from leaving. Ask what reinvestment is really required. Ask who owns the relationship. Ask whether demand is desire, urgency, or compliance. Ask whether your edge is real or rehearsed. Ask whether you are buying a machine, a job, a dependency, or a burden wearing a tie. Then be ruthless. If the business fails the filter, walk. I do not care how fashionable it is. I do not care how fast it grew last year. I do not care how pretty the dashboard looks. Walk. And when you finally find the business that passes, the one with sticky demand, real necessity, durable relationships, manageable friction, and room for you to professionalize without fantasizing, do not hesitate because it feels too ordinary. Ordinary is where a lot of fortunes hide. The truth is that most people will never build serious wealth because they cannot emotionally tolerate how boring sound economics can look at the beginning. They need stimulation, they need admiration, they need a story they can tell before the money arrives. That need keeps them poor. Your advantage begins the day you stop needing that kind of emotional payment. That is the door. On one side is the vanity economy, where people buy businesses that make them feel impressive and slowly discover they bought stress dependence and hidden fragility. On the other side is the ownership economy, where you choose what is protected over what is popular, what is recurring over what is dramatic, what is necessary over what is admired, and what compounds quietly over what performs loudly. You do not get both. You can buy applause, or you can buy a cash machine. You can chase visibility, or you can chase durability. You can keep trying to look like an owner, or you can finally start thinking like one. That choice is not theoretical. It sits in front of you every time you look at a deal, and the life you end up with will tell the truth about which side you chose.